So we have apologies from Senator Alice Mary Higgins. And in today's public session, the committee will meet with representatives of the Banking and Insurance Focus Group on the topic of defective block redress. I want to welcome all of you here to this meeting: Patrick Sharkey, Sean McCabe, Sarah Shovlin and Donna McDade. And each one of you, understand, will give an opening statement. So I just want to remind members and their guests about privilege. So members are covered by privilege when you're here in the House or in the precincts of the House. And those that may be joining us remotely will only have limited privilege. Members are reminded of long-standing parliamentary practice to the effect that members should not comment on, criticise or make charges against a person outside the Houses or an official either by name or in such a way as to make him, her or it identifiable. We'll now invite Mr. Sharkey, you're first, to give the opening statement. So please do.
Thank you, Chair and members of the committee, for inviting our group to attend today's meeting. At the beginning of 2023, the Redress Focus Group's initiative was set up by Roisin Gallagher, Joy Baird, Brenda Joyce and Claire McDade. This initiative seen a public call out to our wider community in County Donegal, seeking volunteers with a range of skill sets to focus in on the many issues we are facing resulting from the defective block crisis in our county. One such area is that of banking and insurance, which is what our group has been focused and engaging on over the last number of months. The shortcomings of the government's response to this crisis is leaving our community as having to work together to try and make the best of what is a very inadequate scheme. By way of personal introduction, I am an impacted homeowner with my family home showing all the signs of defective blocks. Relatively speaking, the property is not yet in bad condition, so I'm yet to apply for redress and was awaiting details of the enhanced scheme. I volunteered for our group, having experience of working in financial services, and I harbour concerns about how banks have not been helping to address the problem. Personally, my wife and I were wrongfully removed from a tracker mortgage by Permanent TSB. We were only restored to a tracker rate after a 5-year process through the FSPO's office. We were overcharged by tens of thousands of euro. In 2019, whilst the Ombudsman's investigation into my rate was ongoing, my mortgage was sold to a vulture fund and is now managed by Pepper on a rate of 7.25% and rising. As we know, Pepper is not a normal lender, and I simply do not know how the funding I will need in future to engage with the redress scheme will be forthcoming. Moving on. Members of our group who have commenced demolition and rebuild of their homes will read statements to the committee outlining the dreadful experience that they've been through. Their experience highlights the need for mortgage providers to step up and provide interim finance to ensure homeowners can carry out the initial phases of work pending drawdown of their grant. In the opening stages of our group's work, we reviewed our standard mortgage terms and conditions. These are the terms that apply on all of our mortgages. We were struck by the obligations placed on homeowners regarding maintenance and repair of our homes. Examples of such conditions within the BPFI's standard terms and conditions include: not to jeopardise or allow any harm to occur to our homes which may in any way depreciate their value, to keep our homes in good and substantial repair, to allow our mortgage provider access to our homes to assess the condition of our homes without them being liable as mortgagee in possession, and to insure and to keep insured all parts of the secured assets. We cannot comply with these covenants when we have defective blocks in our homes. Moving on. Our mortgage terms and conditions contain what we call demand or enforcement events, in which the total debt in our mortgages becomes repayable immediately. Section 7.6 of my terms and conditions state that the debt shall become immediately payable to Permanent TSB if my home is either damaged so as to materially depreciate the value as security, or where it is demolished. This clause is consistent across all lenders and brings our mortgage providers into the centre of this issue. Clearly, each and every mortgage secured on a defective block home, of which there are many thousand, are in a technical default position. Effectively, until our homes are rebuilt, we are repaying unsecured mortgages. We cannot understand why we're here in 2023 highlighting these clauses and where banks have not offered any support or assistance outside of their business-as-usual processes. With thousands of effectively unsecured mortgages on their books, this is a problem for banks and mortgage providers, as well as for us homeowners. Our objectives, therefore, have been as follows: that banks and loan servicing companies will put in place dedicated trained staff, policies, procedures, and a tailored interim finance product to remove the financial barrier to access the scheme. That all impacted homeowners, without exception, are dealt with in conjunction with the vulnerable client processes. That impacted homeowners have a clear and well-publicised way of contacting the dedicated team in each bank. That the bank approval for demolition is to be based on their assessment and approval of the proposed works to rebuild our homes, based on professional and independent engineers' reporting. And that the banking and insurance sectors work together to ensure that all homeowners are sold appropriate insurance policies, noting that fully comprehensive insurance cover is not possible with a defective block home. The key measure of the scheme should be to restore our homes in an unambiguous manner to a fully mortgageable condition, leaving no shred of doubt about our homes being fully restored to market value. We believe there are issues regarding a proposed rebuild on untested foundations, where there is an outer leaf replacement, or where a semi-detached home may be demolished in isolation from the adjoining property. We have discussed these scenarios with local auctioneers who believe such scenarios will probably not restore the property to full market value. The repair of our homes have to satisfy both us as homeowner and our mortgage provider that full value is restored based on professional engineers' recommendation. We have very serious concerns, as is becoming clear through scientific research, that homeowners will have non-compliant material retained within their homes as per ISEN 12620. This leaves us as mortgage holders with a lasting damage default on our mortgages. Such an outcome is not effective use of taxpayers' money and highlights the need to do things right. Thank you for your time. I'd like to pass over now to Sean McCabe.
Thanks, Mr. Sharkey. Mr. McCabe.
Thank you, Patrick. Chair and committee members, thank you for inviting me here today to participate in the meeting. My name is Sean McCabe, and like my fellow volunteers within the focus groups, I'm a defective block homeowner. My wife and I moved into our home in 2016, and after core testing in July 2021, under supervision with the appointed engineer, we were advised that our home should be demolished due to high levels of deleterious materials. We have completed stage 1 of the scheme, and we are now due to enter stage 2 of the scheme as it stands. A bit about myself. I have a financial services background based in the north, where I specialise in mortgages and insurances. However, I must add I'm here in a personal capacity. I was invited onto the focus group and accepted in February past, as I could no longer sit back and watch my family, neighbours and community suffer due to the failings of the scheme. This is the reason I am here. I would like to focus today on our group's meetings and work to date, and in particular our meetings with the main banks, the BPFI and the Minister for Finance, and some key areas that were discussed. In reference to the meetings, we have met and engaged with all our local TDs and requested their help. As a group, we have met individually with AIB, EBS, Bank of Ireland, and await a meeting with permanent TSB on a local level. At our own request, we engaged in a meeting hosted by Brian Hayes with the Banking and Payments Federation Ireland on the 29th of May, in which the following banks attended: AIB, EBS, Bank of Ireland and permanent TSB, along with the presence of the Irish Bank and Culture Board. We met most recently with the Minister of Finance, Mr. Michael McGrath, on the 21st of June at Government Buildings. Key areas that we discussed and areas of concern we have are as follows. The emergency need for a short-term interim finance facility, i.e. an overdraft, 0% bridging type facility, and the need for interim funding up to the cap level of the scheme. Beyond the cap threshold, the need for an equity release type facility that is fair for vulnerable homeowners. We need each lender to develop a tailored, bespoke product that allows each homeowner to cover the shortfall of the scheme. In simple terms, this allows the homeowner to pay their tradesmen on time and finish their property. The banks we have met have acknowledged the need for this, and Minister McGrath agreed that this was indeed a reasonable request. We need these products implemented by the individual banks with the help of the government. The banks must understand that these products will be state guaranteed due to the scheme, and as such, loans should be at 0% interest. We've been very clear when engaging with the banks that they should not profit from the misfortune of defective block homeowners. These products are within the remit and capability of our lenders, and lenders must be reminded they have a duty of care to look after their customers. Another area of concern relates to our mortgage terms and conditions. Mortgage terms and conditions state that damage due to the property or demolition of a property is regarded as a demand event, and as such, mortgage holders are in breach of their terms and conditions. We need to address these issues and get solid assurances. In reference to the new scheme, we are hearing soundings around engineers being appointed by the Department of Housing. We need assurances around the impartiality of this system and certification of proposed works. We ask the question, will this address the damage clause in our mortgages? Another key area of concern is partial remediation. In regards to partial remediation and the home still being party to deleterious materials, we have concerns around how these properties will achieve market value if foundations and partially remediated walls are still left in place. We have concerns around future impact on the remortgage capacity for the homeowner. For example, if full market value is not restored, this could disadvantage a homeowner in regards to their loan to value and also indeed their interest rates. Further to this, if our homes are not restored to full market value, then what is the potential ongoing effect to the economy and housing stock within Donegal and further afield? The Government has a track record of implementing tailored financial products in tandem with financial institutions. Initiatives such as Fresh Start, local authority home loans, government-backed COVID business loans and various SBCI facilities. The Minister touched on this at our meeting. Again, these are areas that need to be explored and should be discussed as a matter of urgency. In conclusion, we have a small number of banking institutions in this country that lend the vast majority of home loans mortgages. We do not have a system like other countries where there are hundreds of lenders in a very multi-layered banking world. Surely the banks, along with the Government, can sit down with us moving forward, listen to our concerns and engage with us on this. And I appeal to you, members of the committee today, to take this message home with you and do everything you can as elected representatives to make this happen. Go to Mica.
Thank you very much, Ms McCabe. Sarah, I think you're next to you. Or Donna, whichever. Yeah.
Thank you for having us here today. So, my name is Donna McDade and I am no longer the owner of the block home. My home was demolished earlier this year. I am currently in the process of rebuilding and trying to manage all the complications that building a home entails, let alone through these circumstances, as well as paying a mortgage, rent, storage costs and a loan whilst we are all dealing with the cost of living crisis. Before I summarise the financial difficulties I have experienced thus far in trying to finance the build, please allow me to outline the lack of support, compassion and empathy that the banking sector, and in my case, Permanent TSB, are enacting. I can answer any questions you may have on finances and provide you a general overview of our journey since August 22. Upon receiving confirmation from our engineer in July 21 that our home was recommended for demolition, I arranged a meeting with Permanent TSB to inform the bank of our circumstances And at that meeting, the bank had placed a market value of $320,000 on our home. Within that meeting, our home became valueless. For 18 months, I attempted to negotiate with Permanent TSB, firstly at branch level, and then I contacted senior management, as the branch representative was clearly not in a position to offer any form of solution other than forbearance. I outlined a number of options that I deemed favourable to both parties. However, they never negotiated or put into place any specific supports for vulnerable defective block homeowners, and had always responded with, "We have agreed to support customers by way of payment breaks or applications for further advances subject to credit assessment. The offer of a mortgage break would be an additional cost to me, and credit only subject to normal lending criteria." The bank offered, I asked the committee here today, do you believe that the bank should continue to profit from families who are having to deal with this horrendous situation that is not the fault of the homeowner? Having nowhere else to turn, I raised a complaint with the Ombudsman, and through a mediation process, it was deemed that the bank's position had not changed, reiterating their final response dated the 15th of August 22. The Ombudsman had informed me that Permanent TSB had responded by saying this is not the bank's fault. A rather callous and unsupportive response from the bank, as we are all aware that this disaster has occurred due to the lack of enforced regulations by government and government agencies. In addition, may I respectfully remind the committee that the state retains a 57.4% shareholding in Permanent TSB. Further insult, August 22, I received a letter from Permanent TSB informing me that the interest rate on my mortgage was going to increase, and it has continued to do so. Since that date in August, our mortgage has increased by 4%, and that equates to an increase of almost €300 per month. I am currently paying over €1,200 on a property that no longer exists. Do you consider this to be fair? I contacted the European Central Bank and the Central Bank of Ireland, and both confirmed that it is at the lender's discretion as to whether or not they pass on interest rate hikes. Once again, I contacted senior management in December 22, requesting that they show an ounce of empathy and pause the continued increase to interest rates on defective homeowner mortgages. TSB responded, "Unfortunately, we are not in a position to amend your tracker rate, as this is your contractual rate which we must honour." Furthermore, the senior manager outlined, "I know this is not what you had hoped for, but you will appreciate that we have thousands of customers on tracker rates, and we cannot change the rate for a particular customer segment." Time and time again, I attempted to highlight that defective homeowners are in a devastatingly unique position with valueless properties through no fault of our own. That support should be considered as unprecedented circumstances and helping this customer segment. In March 23, I contacted the same manager and asked if the bank had since implemented anything specifically for defective block homeowners, and if there were any further developments or indeed talks with government. To which the bank responded, "We have supports in place for anyone that needs our help. There are no unique options for defective block homeowners, as standard supports cover everyone. There have been no further developments since we last exchanged emails." Throughout this process, I have continued to pay my mortgage, as I am aware of the callous nature of how banks sell on mortgage accounts that are in arrears. This is not about not paying a mortgage, but that the banks accept that they have a duty of care to vulnerable customers and a vested interest in the outcomes of their customers engaging with the defective block scheme and the shortfalls of the said scheme. This is what brings us here today. Homeowners, yet again, having to work in collaboration to form support groups to tackle these injustices, because that's what this is, an injustice. the group worked tirelessly to find a clause, something that would grab the bank's attention. This is how the bank's own terms and conditions entered this minefield of institutional bureaucracy. Once again, an approach was made to Parliament TSB, to which they replied in April 23. The bank confirms that for the purposes of the clause of your mortgage terms and conditions, the bank consents to the Mica remedial works taking place in respect of the mortgage property. TSB continued, I note from your letter that the redress scheme is unlikely to cover the full cost of rebuilding your property. In this regard, while the bank has no obligation to advance further funding, the bank would be happy to consider any application that you may wish to make for additional borrowing. Such application will be subject to the bank's usual lending terms and conditions and affordability criteria. This was the final straw for me, and I stopped contacting Parliament TSB. Every request proposed over the last 18 months had been met with indifference, a lack of urgency and empathy. This is profiteering and exploitation by the banking sector, which highlights a blatant disregard for ethical practices and the well-being of customers, as they continue to prioritise their financial gains over a vulnerable segment of their customers. If the enhanced scheme is delivered the same as the 90-10 scheme, in that stage works must be completed before an interim payment is claimed, and the banks do not offer 0% bridging finance, and take a level of responsibility, then homeowners will simply be unable to engage. Especially if the banking sector continue to outline that finance is subject to normal lending criteria. There is nothing normal about our circumstances. Defective block homeowners need to be supported and not vilified by the very institutions that claim to have our interest as the core of their values. Parliament TSB and others need to step up and deal with this disaster as unprecedented circumstances and not financial difficulties. This burden has been thrusted upon thousands of homeowners, and in the words of the senior manager, this is not the bank's fault. It most certainly is not the homeowner's fault. Yet we are being left to rebuild our lives, our homes, whilst trying to stay sane and trying to cope with living the life that we should have been living, because this has been ripped from us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Donna. Sarah?
Thank you. We shouldn't have to be here today, as there should be a fully funded end-to-end scheme. That is not the case. What is evident is that the government and the banks are completely disjointed in relation to workings of this scheme. My name is Sarah Shovlin, and I am here to inform you of the horrendous experience my family have been through trying to engage with the defective block scheme and our existing mortgage provider, who is EBS. With the launch of a scheme in 2020, I quickly engaged an engineer. His report stated our bison slabs were supported with a 2-Newton block and the house needed to be demolished. We were distraught. In January 21, we applied for the defective block scheme and we notified EBS the same day that the house was affected. We requested information and advice on how best to proceed with the existing mortgage. EBS' response to this was to issue a standard financial statement, although we were not in arrears. EBS then advised a working group was in place to address the defective block situation. We followed up 5 months later. EBS still had no direction from their working group. Further follow-up on our side in August 2021, EBS reiterated that normal lending criteria resulted in no approval of a top-up mortgage for us. At no point in this 8-month communication did EBS draw our attention to the covenants of our mortgage terms and conditions. You can imagine our utter dismay when in March 2023, as we started demolition of our house, which coincided with the creation of this group, where I learned demolition was an immediate default per the terms and conditions of our mortgage. 2.5 years of constant communication with EBS, and they never once mentioned we would be in default. If this is not a case of dereliction of duty, I honestly don't know what is. We duly requested a special exemption in March, which was issued in relation to demolition. The letter from EBS did not cover any of the other covenants which were also in breach since before 2021, such as the damage default clause that my colleagues here have spoke about. 2.5 years on, EBS have yet to identify or offer a product that meets the very special needs of our situation as a defective block homeowner. They have not engaged in a meaningful way and have demonstrated a clear lack of understanding of the scheme and the circumstances in which we find ourselves. I would like assurances that all banks will categorise defective block homeowners as vulnerable. There is no evidence that EBS have done this in our situation to date, and I ask each of you here today to ensure this happens for all defective block homeowners. Normal lending criteria cannot apply to this situation. Age, stress tests, loan to value are not applicable. We need short-term cash flow funding supported by the grant and longer-term low-cost funding to reinstate the bank's asset, our home. It is not only EBS with whom we have engaged in the last 2.5 years. In December 2021, we complained to the Central Bank, case number 0004055. The Central Bank have refused to take any action, stating, and I quote, "We are aware that most of the commercial banks have put in place dedicated advisors for those customers who are impacted by mica or pyrite. I would suggest bringing your case to your mortgage provider for your lender to review." This response was not helpful. They then went on to encourage me to go to the Ombudsman if necessary. I had already been to the Ombudsman in July 2021 regarding our situation and the lack of support from our mortgage provider. That case number was 309597. The only solution proposed by EBS at that time was to review our accounts for affordability under normal lending criteria, or offered a payment break, full moratorium or interest only. They did confirm that they had a full suite of options available if we were in financial difficulty. It needs to be noted that the bank would profit from the solutions they offered, and these options would cost us thousands in the long run. No one should be profiting from this humanitarian disaster. Banks need to acknowledge the complexity and difficulty defective block remediation creates and engage in a collaborative and positive manner, offering practical and workable solutions for both short-term and longer-term funding. They, the banks, need to be part of the solution on a scheme that does not offer 100% redress. Moving on, given the new scheme in place since Monday, the 10% retention is still in place for this. If a local builder is doing 2, 3 or maybe 4 defective block homes in a year, they will need significant cash flow of up to $180,000 a year. Many builders in the area won't be able to sustain this and therefore will not take on this type of work. In addition to the lack of engagement from the banks, our government continue to contribute to the problems we face. We are paying a 5% levy on all concrete products used to reinstate my home. We are paying VAT on all purchased materials and labour, adding thousands to my rebuild, thousands that we don't have and we cannot borrow. The new scheme should also bring some relief to the registered landlords of the country. However, with a 20-year charge clawback, what incentive is there for a landlord to fix the home? Do any of you here today have a rental property as your pension fund with a 20-year clawback? I doubt it. I also have reduced the size of my home and I still cannot make the scheme finances work. Without funding, the entire scheme is not workable and my project will be stalled. Others will never get started and the bank's asset will never be reinstated as things stand. Having raised my case with the Ombudsman, the Central Bank and our current lender, with no solutions forthcoming, I ask each of you here today, where do we turn now? Thank you.
Deputy O'Callaghan, you would indicate.
Yeah, thanks very much, Chairman. And listen, I want to thank all of you for coming before the committee this afternoon. And hearing your opening statements, I suppose it reminds us of the stress and trauma, to be honest about it, that the homeowners are going through as a result of the defective core block issue. Could I start by asking you a question, Patrick? Obviously, the Finance Committee, we have a use because we can bring in banks before us, financial institutions. We also engage with the central bank. And obviously, the issues that you raise here, we will do that and follow them up. One of the points you mentioned was obviously in mortgage terms and conditions, there are demand or enforcement events. And obviously, as was mentioned, I think, by Sarah and Donna, it was never brought to the attention of people, whether at the time of entering into the mortgage or at the time of the scheme being set up, that it would constitute an act of default if the house was demolished. Like, has any financial institution used that as a threat, or is your complaint that, in fact, they should remove that unilaterally and recognise that it should not be regarded as a point of default?
I suppose what was of immediate concern is knowing that a relative small handful of demolitions had proceeded, knowing that there was mortgages on those properties, and it appeared to me as being an absolute dereliction of duty and a lack of professionalism in relation to the lender not to be aware that this clause existed.
Yeah.
I also had concerns in relation to a government design scheme which could allow a homeowner to go down this route without procuring the written consent of the lender. I mean, at the end of the day, it simply says on your terms and conditions that the debt is immediately payable where demolition happens. Aside from that, what's very, very clear to me is that where there's a damage contained within your property, regardless of whether that is your own fault as a homeowner, that effectively reduces or diminishes or in fact removes any value as collateral. It's a demand event.
Yeah.
So the bigger picture here is that where there's, I believe it's the largest state-funded redress scheme globally. Surely, to God, in relation to value for taxpayers' money, and of course we're all taxpayers, at the centre of this scheme should be that any damage or any lingering damage is removed, so that these homes are not alone restored for our own purposes in our lifetime, but we're looking here at homes which are the homes of our children. You know, in future, people in the natural flow of life may decide they want to sell their home, and people should know that their homes can be mortgaged for a new family to come along and purchase them. So, to be honest with you, our group were absolutely gobsmacked. And we were always aware that there was conditionality and responsibilities on homeowners to keep a property in good repair. But where this damage clause exists, and where a scheme we feel doesn't have the absolute elimination of damage at its core, we have very serious concerns.
Okay. Would it be fair to say that it would be the preference of the group if the financial institutions agreed to remove that clause or amend that clause with agreement, obviously, with the other contractors, who would be yourselves, in order that it would not be viewed as an act of default if there was demolition for the purpose of the scheme?
I think what we're looking for really is that the demolition approval be granted, but also in line with an acknowledgement and acceptance by the banks that the proposed works restores the property to mortgageable condition.
Yeah.
So, you know, in Sarah's case, you know, and in Donna's case, approval was given in relation to demolition, but there was no process in place to actually examine what was proposed in relation to works, be that there's various options on the table here. So if the redress scheme recommends and the Department for Housing Engineers recommend, you know, for example, an outer leaf replacement, does that restore, or does that completely eliminate the damage clause in our mortgages? Where there's a damage clause in our mortgage, the bank has a legal and has an interest in these buildings where there's a mortgage, and banks have got to be part of the process to say that they accept that the engineer's recommendation. So the science and the professionalism of engineers has to be at the heart of this, rather than cost cutting, because ultimately short-term cost cutting measures or cost management measures may ultimately be a very poor use of taxpayers' money, where a home is not restored as a fully operational part of our economy and as our housing stock.
Thank you very much. And Sean, you come from a financial services background as well. Like, you would have thought that it's clearly in the interests of the financial institutions who are providing the mortgages to ensure that the properties are remedied to the best quality available, since that's our underlying security.
Yeah, well, we were deeply shocked that obviously those conversations hadn't taken place with the government, and we feel that they should be taking place. I think it's hugely important that happens.
And who do you think, like, obviously the mortgages between the homeowner and the financial institution, like, do you think that the government should play a role in intervening in that contractual relationship, or do you think the financial institutions need to just recognise that the provisions need to be amended?
I think both the government and the financial institutions have a part to play, but the financial institutions definitely need to engage with the homeowner regarding this.
And you don't, from what you've told us here, there hasn't been satisfactory engagement as far as you're concerned?
Well, we've met with the banks. We've met with the majority, the main pillar banks, so to speak, and we were shocked by the questioning that we got from the banks, their lack of knowledge on the scheme, and that needs to be addressed.
And have they put, I think it's mentioned somewhere, that have they put designated staff in charge of the scheme, or is that just something that's been, or are there sufficient staff put involved, do you think?
To date, we're waiting on some reassurances around that. One of the lenders has told us verbally that they've set up a 3-4 team to deal with certain questions around defective block homeowners as vulnerable clients, but we need that across the board with all the institutions.
And Donna, I think part of your annoyance with your financial institution is that when you wrote to them and you didn't get much of a response, but they subsequently respond saying you may need further borrowing, and if you do need further borrowing, we'll be happy to provide it. So they were just looking at it as a commercial opportunity for themselves.
Yes, and the offer of a mortgage break that would be an additional cost to me, and finance subject to normal lending criteria.
Yeah. So Donna, you're in a situation now where your home has been demolished.
Correct, yeah.
When did that happen, do you mind me asking?
February of this year.
Okay. And you're paying the mortgage, as you said.
I'm paying a mortgage.
And you're paying for the rent.
Rent, storage costs, and now a loan with the credit union.
Okay. And in terms of the operation of the scheme since last February, like, is it proceeding according to the timeline that you hoped it would proceed according to?
Not really. We had the property demolished in February, and I received my first payment from Donegal County Council at the end of May. We have borrowed 50,000 ourselves, and I have borrowed an additional 16,000 from my parents. So as it stands, 6 months into this project, we're 66,000 into this ourselves. And that is just, I'm very fortunate to be in that position that I could get the money from the credit union, and that my family members are in a position to lend me some money, but that's not sustainable. That's not sustainable at all.
Yeah.
Can I just add as well?
Please,
for somebody have to borrow at higher interest rate from the credit union, at
7.99%. I'm paying an additional 15,000 to borrow that credit. It's costing me 65,000.
So that's essentially, we're looking at personal loan interest rates there really, and the existing lenders not being able to facilitate their customers in that capacity, for me is, that's not right. That needs to be addressed.
Okay.
And I think the banks, when we spoke to them, they acknowledged that verbally, but we need assurances, we need action around that.
What action do you want to see from them, Sean? Like, sometimes it's easy for banks to say we hear your concerns, but what do you want to see them do?
Yeah, I want to see the banks with their product development team come up with short-term interim type facility loans at 0%. I think they need to sit down and engage with us and talk to us about timescale in terms of how long we need the loan for to get the work started and to finish the work. So, you know, the banks have the infrastructure to do it. They have the teams, they have the backup, they have the knowledge, they have the know-how. It's within their remit to set up these products, and it needs to be addressed. As well as short-term interim finance, also equity type release for people over the cap level. So that's important as well for people to, again, to finish off their property. So it's well within their remit. They have the teams, they have the infrastructure, they have the knowledge to do it. They can sit down and work together. We expect that to be done obviously individually, each bank. So yeah, I agree with your point. It's easy to say we need this, but how do you do it? That's how to do it.
Okay, it's helpful for us when we engage with the banks.
And we've spoken to them around that, Deputy, and they've acknowledged that they have the facility to do that.
Okay. Okay, just finally, Sarah, you mentioned in your opening statement that you would like to see all financial institutions treat all defective block homeowners as vulnerable customers. Like, do you believe at present you're being treated as a vulnerable customer by EBS?
I haven't seen evidence of that we have been treated like that, no. I mean, they talk about, you know, a vulnerable customer as somebody who's gone through some sort of trauma, be it a marital breakdown, be it an illness. If losing your home isn't a traumatic event, then, you know, I don't know what else is.
Yeah.
And there has to be certain, you know, extra checks and balances done and extra care and attention being taken. You know, you talked there a moment, you asked Sean about if the banks had set up dedicated groups.
Yeah.
Like in 2020, the Banking Federation put out a framework that all banks signed up to. And here I am 3 years later, and I still don't know who the banking experts for the defective blocks in my bank are.
So you're not getting the benefit of the framework that was put in place 3 years ago?
I would go as far as to say that no banks set anything up from that.
Okay.
They signed it and walked off and didn't do anything. My emails over 8 months trying to follow up with EBS about what are we going to do, trying to get ahead of planning. And, you know, nobody there could tell me anything. And there's still no product available, a special product.
And can you engage with an EBS office in Donegal, or
Yeah.
is it over the phone? And is there anyone in there who's actually in charge of this?
I mean, there's a lady that we're speaking to, and we've been speaking to her for
Okay.
3 years. But, you know, who's in charge of it?
Okay, you don't believe that you're getting treated as the vulnerable group that you are, considering the trauma you're going through as a
Correct.
result of the demolition?
They're
of your
treating
homes?
us as normal lending criteria, as normal people looking for money. That's not what this is.
And, sorry, sure, as late as March this year, Permanent TSB responded to me, there are no unique options for defective block owners as our standard supports cover everyone.
Okay, so they're not distinguishing you at all. They're just regarding you as part of the standard customers. You're
And
not being
that's
treated as
why
vulnerable.
I didn't go to the bank for a loan, because why would I give them further business?
Sorry, Sean, you want to?
In addition to that, Deputy, from our conversations with the banks, and I have engaged with 3 of the banks on a personal level, we found that there was no reporting in regards to defective block homeowners. So there's no record taken, there's no statistics, no numbers taken. So when you're phoning up and you're speaking to the mortgage advisor or customer service, whatever the case may be, there's been no record taken of that. So they have no data on where we're at in terms of defective block homeowners.
Yeah.
And when we met with the Minister, he was particularly interested to hear that that was the current situation, and we also wanted to know, for example, was that being reported in the central bank? Is there any records? Is there any data? Is there any metrics going through from the institutions in regards to defective block homeowners? We don't believe there is. We don't believe there is.
From my experience working in the sector, you know, okay, the repayment of the mortgage is not the single measure of sort of compliance, and there has to be recognition that many thousands of mortgages are effectively being repaid. It may look on the face of it that there's no problem, but there's absolutely no collateral security in the background. One of the comments that was made to me in relation to this issue was that the bank in question regarded the existence of the scheme as effectively preserving its collateral security value. But where there's barriers to entry and where there's a need for interim funding and joined up thinking between the homeowner and the lender, there actually is no scheme to preserve the value of the security. So there has to be absolutely suitable tailored products and finance put in place in order to preserve their own collateral security. So in my opinion, banks should have provisioning processes in place in the background, even though we're paying our mortgages, because effectively the bank cannot take possession of our homes and apply for the grant remediation scheme. It has to be the homeowner. So their collateral is protected by us, the homeowner. So we are helping the bank.
You're benefiting the banks, yeah.
Yeah, but they need to step up and help us.
Okay. There seems to be, maybe they recognise it, but they're not giving recognition to you that it's in their interest as well.
I think they do recognise it. I think our group's engagement has been an education process for them.
Yeah.
And to be blunt, here we are in 2023, many years into this crisis, and I think there's been big shortcomings in relation to their, as Sean said, the capturing of the data and the reporting of this.
Listen, thanks very much. My other colleagues will have questions as well, but thanks very much for coming in today.
Deputy O'Callaghan. Deputy Doherty.
Thank you, and thank you, Chair, and thank you for our guests to come in this evening to the committee, or this afternoon to the committee, and particularly for sharing your own personal stories. All four of you are victims in relation to this scandal. We seem to be dealing with scandals nearly every day now in this house. But can I ask you, we've had the revised scheme published, maybe just to start on that, and all four of you, I'm sure, have gone through what that means for yourself personally, and I've looked at the guidelines and it continues to talk about it's 100% redress and all the rest. Can I just ask you, have you looked at this yourselves, and what does this mean? Does it mean that there's in your own cases, is there a shortfall in this scheme for yourselves? Because obviously any shortfall will feed into the need for additional, not bridging finance, but actually finance. So maybe just to ask for your opening comments in relation to, I know it's only kind of hot off the blocks in relation to when it was published yesterday, but just to give any initial views on it.
I believe the publication of the guidelines hasn't really changed fundamentally anything from our group's perspective. I suppose the first thing is in relation to effectively the cash or the working capital that we need to kickstart works in advance of receiving the grant drawdowns. That's the first thing. And secondly then, it's the shortfall, the longer term shortfall for larger properties. That certainly still exists. I think the thing to remember is that certainly in relation to standalone houses, the majority of us built our homes as effectively self-builds, where as a self-build you would engage everything through from your architect, your groundworks, your block work, your roofing. You would engage the various contractors to effectively deliver the project. Now, when each of those tradespeople finish their work, they require payment. Okay. Now, contrast that with a situation where, for example, there's a turnkey contract, perhaps with a contractor who delivers a turnkey finish. In such scenarios, the contractor could have working capital facilities and the scale and capacity to take on multiple houses, but they're very few and far between in the county. So we believe in order for the scheme to work, people need the interim zero cost funding, which effectively is guaranteed repayment through the ultimate drawdowns from the grant. Thereafter, perhaps for the larger unit types, there's a longer term shortfall, and we need banks to look at that and to look at that sympathetically and realistically.
There is probably an impression, because it keeps on being said by government that there's 100% redress here, but there seems to be an impression, probably because it hasn't been in the spotlight as much as it would have been 2 years ago during the big demonstration, or indeed last year, that this issue is sorted. So today we're dealing with the issues of implementation of the scheme and the bridge and finance. But you talked about the second part of that, which is that there will be a large proportion of homes that will still have to, they don't need bridge and finance, they actually need finance. The grant will not cover the cost of remediation of their home. Have you personal experience of people who are in that scenario, that what is announced here doesn't remediate your home in full?
Well, absolutely. Donna and Sarah are in this position where they've started the works and they're patching this together with the assistance of credit unions and family members and so forth. It's completely unrealistic. So the fact is what I suppose as a group, we're dealing with the reality of the scheme as it's presented and how it interacts with our mortgages. But this ultimately is not an end-to-end, fully funded redress scheme. This is not 100%. We're trying to make do with the grant scheme and trying to make it work. There's examples of agricultural grant schemes in relation to the farming sector where they ultimately are drawing down grants, but the banks have facilities in place to deliver the project. So that's a similar scenario to us. We need the banks to provide tailored facilities, not alone for the interim funding, but also for the longer term shortfalls, because ultimately the home or the security underpinning that mortgage is worthless until it's completed, and that's in nobody's interest.
I could give a little example. We submitted our stage 2 application in May of last year, and we had to have worked out our costings from our contractor with that submission. So when piecing these together, which it's quite a hard task in itself, we had to forecast inflation hikes within the overall budget of this. And as we said, I'm not a project manager. I'm fortunate that I have construction people within my family that were able to help me with this. But in May of last year, our property was estimated to come in at 412,000 to rebuild. I'm currently renting for almost a year now. I did get the emergency 15,000, but 15,000 over 12 months in rent doesn't last that long. So even with that, and with the 5,000 for storage costs, that's bringing me up to 432,000. So, but even before we started the build, we were 12,000 short, and prices are continuing to increase. VAT's continuing to, the cost of VAT and supplies and products is continuing to increase, and we're expected to forecast these hikes in inflation almost over a year ago now, since we submitted our costs.
Even the revised scheme, Donna, for you, what will leave you short 12,000? Is that what you're saying?
As we start, I'm 12,000 short.
You're well into rebuilding your home.
Yeah. So I can outline some costs for you. So when you think about that 420 cap, our engineer fees are coming in just over 18,000. So that has to come out from that 420,000. Your rental and storage costs, 20,000. That has to come out of your 420 cap. The demolition has to come out of your 420 cap. Not part of the rebuild, your demolition. And bringing that up to subfloor level cost us 53,000 excluding VAT. So that has to come out of your rebuild cap. Then you've got an approximate VAT bill at 13.5% for the total cost of the build. It's coming in at around €56,700. That has to come off your 420,000. So the total deduction for non-building work before I even put a thermal block on the ground to start our rebuild is €147,851.50. deduct that from your 420.
It's a massive amount, and probably puts it in context of, you know, when people say, well, why can't you build a house for, you know, less than that? Can you just maybe explain, so when that is done, when the contractor signs over the house to you, are you moving into a house the way you left it? You know, do you have to do anything further? Do you have to put carpets down, or do you have to do anything beyond that? Like, is that everything done, curtains hung and the whole lot, or is there additional cost beyond that on you?
Probably not. And in all honesty, we've put into storage our kitchen, stairs. We've designed bedrooms slightly smaller so we can reuse carpets. We lifted solid oak wooden floors, which aren't designed to be lifted and re-put down again. My 79-year-old father rerouted every single one of them pieces of wooden floor so we could reuse that. That's in storage. We have our bathroom furniture, anything at all that we can potentially reuse. So this is us reusing these materials when we shouldn't have to. We've redesigned bedrooms so we can fitted wardrobes back in there again. People shouldn't have to be doing this. And as I said, I'm fortunate that I have a construction background within my family that are able to do this for me. But this isn't going to be the case for the vast majority of homeowners. They're not going to have that support network that I have. So as this is at the stands, we just don't know. We don't know what our finished pot will be. What our overall budget is because of the enhanced scheme only being enacted there on late Monday evening. We still don't even know where our overall budget's going to be. So it's very difficult to forecast that. We initially only borrowed 30,000 from the credit union. Our house was demolished mid-February. We didn't get our first payment to the end of May. That's 3.5 months. You cannot not pay people for 3.5 months and expect them to do this for goodwill. That's just not plausible. So we borrowed 30,000 to get it started, and within a matter of weeks we had to get that topped up for another 20,000. So that's 50,000 that we've borrowed. Them finances were exhausted. I don't know if any of you have built a home, but believe you me, I never realised money would go so quickly. And then I borrowed another 12,000 from my parents, and then an additional 4,000 there last week. Otherwise, we would have had to stop the contract. By us stopping the contract and having workers down tools, it will cost me, on average, €350 per day when you contribute what we're paying in rent, storage, and the loan and the interest accrued on that. So it's in my vested interest to try and beg, borrow, and steal from my family members, because otherwise it's down tools and work stops, and you will not get contractors to come back on site if they've got 2 days here, a couple of days in a few weeks' time. It's just not feasible. So as I said before, as we are 6 months into our build, we ourselves have put in €66,000.
And you mentioned, Donna, that you're quite fortunate that you were in a way that, and obviously you're not fortunate because this is all foisted upon you because of the light touch or no touch regulation that happened, and you're very much a victim in this, but in trying to deal with this, that you are in a position to be able to get a loan, which is a high interest loan, you know, compared to, and we all support the credit unions, but like compared to a mortgage which you may be borrowing in around half the rate.
Exactly. We're fortunate that both my husband are working full time, and we were able to secure the loan from the credit union. Yeah. And that we're in a financial position to be able to afford to pay that back. You're
operating under the old scheme. So yes. There will be changes as a result of the revised scheme, which will allow for stage payments, but a retention, which was mentioned there, a 10% retention in each of the stage payments, which is going to be problematic again. And maybe my question, and Sarah, maybe if you want to touch on this here, or I think anybody who's involved in this situation knows so many others, and maybe that's important to put on the record that we have 4 here, but how many multiples of yourselves are in this position, because the banks are dealing with what is going to be a tsunami of these cases. And the problem is that yous are leading the field and the banks are trying to find their way, but there's going to be thousands of people that the banks are going to have to deal with. And that's why I think, Sarah, you were making the point that there needs to be a bespoke solution for those that have defective block. But we all know individuals that have defective block that have gone through stage 1 that needs full demolition, but they may be in pension age.
Yeah.
How are they going to get loans of 20 or 30,000 euro from the credit union? Or worse still, again, Donna, your scenario at the minute, you know that you're going to be 12,000 over the grant. Many others are going to be 40 and 50,000 euro over the grant. How does a pensioner actually get a loan for that when they're relying on the state pension?
Yeah, if we even think about the scheme, so like it's a €500 to get on the scheme. Okay, €500 to you guys is probably nothing, but to a lot of people at home, it's a lot. So they're already going to the credit union or somewhere to get the €500. After that, then they have to get a builder to do a building report, and I'm talking about the new scheme now, from what I've read of it, a builder's report, right? Is that free? Probably not. Is the builder going to wait 6 months to get money? Definitely not. You move it on then, and you have to apply for planning permission to demolish your house. That's more money, right? And you have to apply for planning permission to rebuild the house, even if it's the same house. Exact same house, you have to apply for planning permission. That costs money, that costs an architect. So you're 3 months, 6 months into your trying to work with a new scheme, and, you know, I could easily see that being a £5,000 bill. So how does anybody, you know, who's trying to work with this, how do they fund that if the banks are not there? And at the end of the day, we keep coming back to it. This is our home, but it's also the bank's asset. It's in their interest that this scheme works, and we know it's not 100%. As Donna said, like the 420, you take off your engineer's fees, you take off the storage accommodation. You know, the government are very good at saying, oh, we've released another grant for accommodation. Well, that comes off the 420. So before you start, you're down to 380,000 to build a house. I, in my case, have made my house smaller. I was right out at the starting block, you know, in 2020. And in 2021, I dashed ahead trying to get things done, got my architect, said, let's just make the house smaller, I might have some chance to finish it. The new scheme doesn't allow for penalty-free downsizing. Like, for any of you who don't know what that is, if your house is 250 square metres and you say, okay, I didn't have as many kids as I thought, or whatever the case may be, I'll rebuild a 230 square metre house. Your grant is payable on what you rebuild, and yet you have government say it's like for like. That's not like for like. Like for like is pay me my grant on the house that I worked hard to get and build, and I will use that money to finish my house. I won't be here crying at yous and crying at the bank and everybody because I can't make this work. I don't know how many times we need to say it. It's not working.
And the key thing there, if you build a smaller house, you don't benefit. You don't financially benefit from that. You just don't have to go to the credit union or to pay the shortfall of the government scheme. Yeah. Okay. In relation to where we're at with the banks, because like I've met with the banks myself, I've met with the BPFI, and I've met with the central bank in relation to this, and have argued strongly that there needs a bespoke scheme. And I want to commend the focus group. I think you have done amazing work on behalf of all of the people that are going to follow yourselves in relation to this journey, and hopefully it will be easier for them because of your work. My own impression has been the bank's view is you're paying your mortgage, we don't want to know about it, just keep on paying your mortgage and sure, tell us when the house is rebuilt. But the fact that they have to actually consent to the demolition, I think is really, really significant, because to me, and I hope the committee maybe will hear from the banks in relation to this here, by allowing you to demolish their asset, as it would be seen in the bank's eyes, then they have to be certain that you can restore that asset. That puts a duty on them to be able to ensure that you're able to have the bridging finance, but also the other finance that may be the shortfall in terms of the scheme. In your view, I don't know how many of you were at the meeting with the BPFI and with the banks that were there, and it's great that was facilitated. But in your view, is the penny dropping with the banking sector that they also now have a problem, that they will need to do, that the normal rules of lending, Sarah, as you mentioned, isn't going to work here, that they need to do a bespoke product for what are thousands of people who have to demolish and rebuild their homes?
Yeah, I feel that, for example, AIB Group's decision to establish a four-person team to address AIB and EBS customers, I think that was a positive step. One of the issues of concern that came out of our meeting with the BPFI was we were bringing up the whole issue in relation to unambiguously restoring the value of our home in terms of removing completely the damage clause. And you know, one of the comments from one of the banks was, well, you know, we're quite relaxed in relation to value of the asset. Now, that's all well and good for, you know, a single mortgage and a single home on a bank balance sheet. But this is our life's work. This is our homes that we've worked hard for, that we're trying to bring up our families in. And for us, there's absolutely nothing more important than restoring our home to full value, and to know that post-remediation, you know, if we want to remortgage our home in relation to an improved interest rate, that we can do so. So we need this to be joined up. We need this to be joined up thinking. I referenced in my own introduction there that through no fault of my own, my mortgage is with a vulture fund. So I'll need to refinance. I need to get my situation restored. So I need somebody somewhere to tell me that they regard this work as fully restoring my house as a mortgageable property. Because, you know, a mortgage is not simply to pay for your house and you take out one mortgage. I mean, you know, ultimately, in a functioning market, if another mortgage provider has a better interest rate, you should be able to remortgage and get a cheaper rate. That's denied to us. And there could be issues in relation to loan-to-value mortgages in terms of reduced or more beneficial interest rates that we may not get because our homes don't have that full value restored. So to answer your question, Piers, I think the penny is dropping, but I think that the need to fully address what's in our terms and conditions is not as simple as a demolition sign-off. It's actually, this restores our home to full mortgageable condition. And that's where the independence of the engineer certification and the placing the science at the centre of all of this has to be at the centre of each and every remediation.
So a couple of final questions. I know there's other colleagues who want in. In relation to the lenders, in terms of a bespoke product, would it be fair to say that what the demand is that in terms of bridging finance, which will still be required under the new scheme because there's a retainer of 10%, which is going to cause huge problems in Donegal and elsewhere, because who's going to build? You know, you're 100% right. Was it Donna or was it yourself, Sean, that made the point? You know, that's going to cause a serious problem if you can't pay the contractors in time, or the individuals that are carrying out the work if it's not a contract job. So would it be fair to say that the ask is that there should be bridging finance at 0%?
Yes,
that, you know, from the lender. What about the residual amount, the shortfall in terms of look, we all know, and it's a separate discussion, but my party is very adamant that we need to have a proper scheme that covers 100%, but we are dealing with what we have right now at the moment. So in relation to those shortfalls, the 10,000s, the 20,000s, the 40,000s that may be there with shortfall, how does the banks deal with that in your view? What is the proposal that the banks need to look at in relation to that? For example, the pensioner who needs their house demolished, and it may be a larger house. They're not allowed to do no penalty downsizing, which makes no sense whatsoever, but they may have a shortfall of 10 or 20,000 that they can't afford.
I suppose we acknowledge that you know, banks are commercial entities, and they'll point out that this is not their fault either. But one of the things that our group has spent a little bit of time examining is that you know, where there's a societal or a social need, the government itself has a track record of through the SPCI and other initiatives to provide funding for people who need, you know, fresh start mortgages, etc. So where homeowners are facing this shortfall, or where, for example, pensioners are facing shortfalls, we're pointing out that the government have got involved in relation to providing facilities and finance where there's a social or a societal need. So, you know, to answer your question, Piers, like, you know, how do we bridge the gap for, or how do banks and our financial group bridge the gaps for older people? How do we? We don't know. Yeah. I mean, ultimately, it's a big problem.
And some of those homes may not even be mortgaged anymore, you know, so that there's no relationship with the bank anymore. But yet, they still will have to find bridge and finance. They will still have to find residual. Just the other question I would have for you is, have the banks any concern that the foundations are not being dealt with here, so that the asset is being restored through the grant scheme, but it's been built on foundations that aren't being restored?
We believe they have serious concerns, yeah.
Have they indicated any way, are they satisfied still to work on this basis, or have they indicated anything to you?
I suppose the guidelines that came out on Monday evening were only a day down the track from that. So we believe they're still examining this, but we have had some feedback in relation to concerns and foundations, absolutely. Because I believe at the end of the day, our interests are aligned in relation to restoring the value, and you know, in particular in relation to the local management. We've had meetings with AIB Group and Bank of Ireland in relation to the local management, and they're very conscious of the need to restore what is ultimately about a quarter of the housing stock in our region to mortgageable condition, because their local business is reliant on transacting on these houses. So they're very attuned. We do await a meeting with Permanent TSB locally on this matter as well.
I think it's important to say as well that the banks will tell you that they're very much reliant on the professionals who are the engineers who are saying, you know, it's not good enough to build on your foundations. And you have, you know, the regulation, the ISEN 12620, I think, as well, which states that, you know, there will be, if you don't repair your home completely, that there'll be residual uncompliant material left within your home. So what engineer is going to say that house is of a standard construction? Is your insurance company going to insure you? These are all questions that we shouldn't have to answer. These are questions that you guys in government should have thought about as part of the scheme, and that the bank and the insurance companies of Ireland need to be working together to find the solutions.
And I didn't get the chance to go into EBS, and I think EBS were complete dereliction of their duty not to inform you and other customers that you were in default of your mortgage, and therefore your mortgage could be called in. It's very clear in terms of the terms and conditions. You know, if a building or structure of the mortgage property is demolished or damaged so as to materially affect the value of the security created by the mortgage, and these conditions of the mortgager surrenders his or her interest in the mortgage property, like, that's very, very serious. And there is a role, in my view, there should be a role for the central bank in relation to this here in terms of consumer protection, because it hasn't happened, and the banks, I think, would only be too happy to get rid of that clause. But the clause is there, and it's between both parties, and it pulls the banks into this, because now they can't just pretend that this isn't happening, and they have to ensure that their asset is restored to the proper value, and that it's actually restored. Because I wouldn't get a mortgage today if I had, you know, foundations in, and the engineer were saying you can't build on those foundations. There's no way a bank would give me a mortgage to build on those foundations. So why, you know, so that this is where the banks really come into this. So the final issue I just wanted to mention with you in relation to this is, I know you've had a meeting with the Minister for Finance as well, and he has made very positive comments in the floor of the Dáil in response to myself in relation to this. What maybe on this question here, because Patrick, your loan is sold to a vulture fund, and there's many others that have been sold. Loans have been sold, maybe not to vulture funds, but some have been sold by Ulster Bank now to some of the Main Street lenders. Have you any indication, and this is something I've asked the committee to ask all of the banks on, because I believe it is happening, or has happened at least in a selective way, where there has been a piece of work done to look at the asset values of some of the properties or collateral that were held by certain banks before they were sold on to others. Therefore, the people who hold your loans today received a write-down because they were affected by Mica. And I think it's really important that that situation is clarified, because we shouldn't have a situation where, for example, a permanent DSB bought an Ulster Bank loan portfolio, just for argument's sake, and had a write-down because some of the properties may have Mica because of the concentration of Ulster Bank loans in Donegal, for example, or indeed a vulture fund. Have you any discussions, or have you had any discussions with the banks of whether they sold or bought loan portfolios that had a reduced value as a result of potential defective block?
What I can tell you, Piers, is that I'll give you an example of a couple, late 50s, early 60s, who were going back with National Irish Bank, and fully in terms, mortgage transferred to the vulture fund, and they're impacted. So these transactions, Piers, are going back now a fair number of years, and you know, I know personally speaking, when my mortgage was transferred back 2019, hand on heart, I probably did know that I had defective blocks, but I didn't want to acknowledge it. So I suppose what I'm saying is, you know, some of these mortgages may have been transferred acknowledging the reduced value and others not. But there's no clarity on any of this.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Here, look, and thanks to you all for being here today. I think this is really important. I come from Mayo, so obviously there's a lot of people in the similar situation that you were in. And it's absolutely clear that this scheme cannot work without the cooperation of the banks. Not only the cooperation, but obviously the recognition that this is an abnormal situation, and trying to fit it into some kind of a normal bracket just is never, ever, ever going to work. Now, I'm really concerned because I just come back from questions with the Taoiseach, and one of the questions I put to him is, Taoiseach, is this 100% redress scheme? And he is still saying that it is. And you give a very good example, Donna, and thank you for the breakdown. I'll give you a breakdown just from Mayo. So the cost of my demolition and rebuild is 296,000 on the new scheme. It's 2,045 per square metre. My house is 94.54 square metres. 2,045 by 945, obviously, is 193,334. That person is still 103,000 short on that. Now, that's also a person who actually bought the house from Mayo County Council with the Mayo County Council loan, who again are refusing. And you're in the situation where you're absolutely trapped with these, with the financial institutions that you're working with. As you say, you can't swap over to get a favourable rate or anything like that. So you're wholly dependent on the government to not liaise with the banks, but to get a result for you with the banks and the Banking Federation. Now, the Taoiseach said there as well, when I questioned around the engagement with the Banking Federation, is continuing. And I want to ask you, in your experience, has there been any formal movement at all in the situation that you were in from day one going to the banks to where we are today?
None whatsoever. And this for me was when I said in my statement that March 23 was the last straw for me. I thought, what was the point of contacting Parliament TSB anymore? I effectively got the same response from them when I first contacted them, saying that you'd fall under the remit of forbearance. I'm not struggling with my mortgage payments. I always said I wanted help from the bank. I outlined a number of scenarios. They never even offered to negotiate. It was always subject to the normal lending criteria and a mortgage break that would be a cost to me. And they were even so nice to work it all out over the term of my remaining mortgage that it would only merely cost me an additional €15 a month. They've never come forward. They've never even negotiated. It was always just mortgage break and lending subject to normal criteria.
So in your opinion, are the banks making money or extra money off the backs of the people who are impacted by pyrite and mica?
Yes.
I think they would like to.
Yes.
But I don't know that people are able to borrow and to engage with them. To go back to your first question, Rose, so since joining this committee and having tried to meet with the banks and the BPFI and indeed the central bank, we've written several letters, and the first letter that came back from most establishments was, this is nothing to do with us, you need to go to the Department of Housing. And only by our repeated engagement with those companies or entities did they come and meet us at the table. And I don't know if I speak for everyone on the committee, but I feel that there's a certain amount of hope from having had those meetings. Maybe it's just because I'm naive as somebody who doesn't do this every day, but I would really like to see the 4 banks that we did meet step up now, hurry up. We can't wait any longer, and show us what products they're going to come up with. And at that point, we can answer your question in a more positive manner, perhaps.
Yeah.
Deputy, sorry. In regards to the central bank, I know Deputy Doherty touched on it as well. We've written to the central bank. They have agreed to a meeting in a supervisory capacity, but we feel the central bank need to do more. We feel that they need to lead the way. They will
always just refer you back to your own bank, that the individual banks have specific supports in for defective block owners when they don't, and they haven't done anything for 2 years.
We did receive an emailed commitment to meet with us from the central bank in relation to the consumer protection capacity. That's a fair number of weeks ago. We've been following up and asking, and I suppose the fact where homeowners have worthless homes and homes that are quite literally in many cases falling down, we actually can't think of many more issues that could be more serious in relation to their consumer protection mandate, and couple that with the fact that technically speaking, and not technically speaking, factually speaking, there are thousands of mortgages that are repayable on demand in this country.
Yeah.
And the role of the central bank is not alone in relation to consumer protection, but also in relation to the financial reporting of banks. And where they have thousands of mortgages that are effectively unsecured. It's a massive issue, and I just can't understand why we're here up to 2 months later and the meeting has not yet taken place with our group.
Yeah, and further to that as well, Deputy, we're talking about three banks here in this company. We're talking about 3 banks. It's not a multi-layered banking system. We're talking about 3 major banks. Okay, we acknowledge that there's other institutions out there as well that are equally as important that we need to engage with. But the 3 major banks, surely in this day and age we can get round the table, engage with us. We're volunteers, we're happy to engage. But it's not a multi-layered banking system like other countries.
Yeah. Can I just ask you, in terms of the valuation of the houses, you know, in the first instance where the bank come out to evaluate, where for people who say apply for the demolition part of it, which is again, but that's already been covered. So they come out and they value the house at, say, 300,000 for the sake of it, but the house is actually worth nothing as it is. So, and if you want another valuation, that you have your own valuer come and value it, then they say you have to pay for that, to have that valuation done. But could you just speak to the conflict that's there between the 0 and the 300,000 and why you think that they're doing that? Because your home, so on one hand they're saying your home is worthless, but on the other hand they're saying it's worth 300,000.
Yeah, I don't think, well, certainly not in our case, nobody from the bank came out to value the property before we demolished it. I think Donna was saying that she had a meeting.
It was when I first engaged, when we first got the report from our engineer back in July 21 that our house was recommended for demolition. I sought an appointment with Parliament TSB at the local level, Letterkenny branch, and at that branch they had placed a market value of 320,000 on our property, but also within that meeting it became valueless because we had the engineer's report deeming that the property had to be demolished. Ever since then I've been dealing with a senior manager in Cork and nobody's ever visited, no one's ever come to look. I've sent them on pictures, I sent them on photographic evidence, and you're just met with, oh yeah, we're really sorry about this, but there's a government scheme in place, go on and engage with that. And that has been the response.
Yeah, and Deputy, currently as the property stands, the only value is site value. Property is worth zero. It's not mortgageable.
Yeah.
So in reality, you're looking at site value.
Yeah.
That's where we're at with this.
And it's only the homeowner who is eligible for the grant scheme, not a bank in a repossession. So the presence of the scheme in itself does not preserve their security.
Yeah.
It's the homeowner who preserves the security.
Yeah.
So they really need to work with us to make the scheme work.
Yeah, exactly. I want to just cover another couple of things, things that I raised with the Taoiseach as well, in terms of the independent engineers, and I know we've discussed it a bit, to ensure that nobody is coerced into partial remediation. I put that question to him, but again he didn't answer that, because that would be one of the concerns for the Mayo homeowners as well, in that we're very clear that all of the homes in Mayo need complete demolition. Could you just speak to that for a moment, how we're going to ensure that that doesn't happen?
Well, there needs to be a very clear appeals process, and we need to have assurances from the Department of Housing that the engineers are fully impartial. Be very interested to hear how the inner workings of that. And, you know, the general consensus throughout the county at the minute, to date, is that engineers did not want to stand over, the majority of them did not want to stand over anything that was only partially remediated. And in fact, that's been my own personal experience and family experience. So I'd be very interested to hear how this is going to come about, the inner workings of this, because there's a general concern that people will be coerced into taking partial remediation. So I think there needs to be clear guidelines in place. I know from reading the regulations, and we've only had a day or so to digest quite a meaty document, we see that there's appeals processes in place, but they need to be very clear on that, and they need to give the public reassurances around that.
Yeah. What I'm concerned about as well, that people who are in very restricted financial situations are desperate to get their homes in some kind of livable position, that's where the coercion will take place, in that maybe people who are fortunate enough to be able to afford it will be able to do the full amount, but that the link between somebody's financial circumstances, that they may be either blocked out of the scheme altogether or then going for a partial scheme. Are we going to have different tiers in relation to how people are treated within this scheme?
Absolutely. And I think what our group are trying to emphasise here today is that certainly where a mortgage exists on a property, there's a default, there's a damage clause caused by the presence of defective material. What we see here is, in those scenarios that you've outlined, Deputy, is that the homeowner is effectively continuing with this default position because the damaged materials are still existing in the property. Now, this is a 2.2 billion scheme plus, and at an absolute minimum, what we should be expecting here in relation to value for money is that effectively our homes are restored to full, unambiguous, mortgageable condition and value. Now, when a bank lends money, they have very many controls in place in relation to making sure that their security is protected. Okay, so effectively the money is already lent here, but we need, and we're almost acting for our banks here, to say we're demanding and we fully expect that our homes are fully put back in mortgageable condition again.
Yeah. Okay. I have to ask, if you don't mind, it's not directly bank related, but have any of you applied for the SEI scheme?
In the process? We are in the process of doing that as well. We were advised to do it through the one-stop shop. But it's outlays that you have to accrue before you get anything back. I had to pay €500 for to try and get a BER rating on a property that no longer exists, which is quite a complicated process, and then pay 2,200 to actually just to get onto that one stop. So that's the guts of 3,000 there that I'm out of pocket myself, on top of everything else that we're out of pocket on. So you add that on to my 66,000 that I'm already out. I'm just shy of 70,000 into this so far.
Can I ask you specifically, sorry Donna, are you coming up against a problem with the NPRN number? Where I have people
you see, initially
because
we had to move out of our property last August because it was structurally unsafe. So initially we were told that we would not be eligible for any of the grants. So it wasn't on my radar.
Yes.
My house was demolished in February, and then it was announced,
Yes.
oh, you can now apply for the SEA energy grants. So it was through the one-stop shop consultant that really advised us, and then through a BER technician that we were able to get a recommendation on what the probable BER rating would have been on our property at that time. So I think we were certified a C. And that would have been based on when the property was built, which was 2006, the heating system, the windows, and so on and so forth.
Why I'm asking you is there's a particular problem as well where people who have availed of the SEAI grant before, it may be years ago, it may be, you know, right at the original terms, and that's attached to the NPRN number. And now they are being refused for the scheme this time around because they've already availed of it. And why it's like the bank, so they're treating that as normal as well, even though there's a promise of a specialised grant through SEAI. Homeowners in Mayo are finding that they're being turned away because of that, because it works out after all that it's not specialised, it's business as usual. Do have any of you come across that?
We're in a similar situation. So we had applied for an air-to-water grant several years ago, which we installed, which wasn't great considering there was holes in the wall and the heat was going out it. But anyway, we are able to apply for some SEIA grants, but not anything that you had before. So we're looking at some other different options for making the house energy efficient. But you can't apply for the same grant twice, is what we're being told, which is also an issue. I mean, we have the machine. We're not looking to buy a second machine, but we have all the other paraphernalia that goes with it. The underfloor heating. I mean, all of that is no longer usable. So we're definitely being penalised in that perspective as well. Yeah.
That is exactly the situation that I'm talking about. Is that situation where they're being refused on that basis, where it's like for like, but yet while you have some of the piping infrastructure that maybe be able to be reutilised, they're locked out of applying again, and that really has to be rectified. And it's something that I know my own colleague Owen O'Brien is following up on as well to get that anomaly cleared. I've taken up quite a lot of time. I really thank you for the valuable information that you've submitted to the committee today in trying to deal with this once and for all. You have been very clear in terms of your submissions, in terms of what hasn't been done and what needs to be done. It's a desperate situation where we're this many years down the line and we still find that the financial institutions are treating you in the way that you are.
I really hope that, you know, this is not a fact-finding mission on your behalf, and that everyone here today is taking actions. Like, we've asked a lot of questions collectively as a group. If you don't know what those questions and actions are, come back to us, but we are expecting actions from this meeting.
It's certainly not a fact-finding, and I can tell you as somebody who's been dealing with the issue of pyrite in Mayo for about 12 years now.
Thank you.
And it's been a long, long and arduous journey, as it is for yourselves. So, thank you.
Thank you, Deputy. Unfortunately, the chairman had another engagement, so he had to go away. And unfortunately, you're left with the vice chairman for the duration of the meeting. So we have 3 speakers, including you truly, and we are scheduled for a short break of 2 or 3 minutes, if that's enough. Which do we do? We'll presumably go for the short break first because we're supposed to have it anyway. 2 minutes, 3 minutes, 4 minutes. Everybody, even on the television in the wall. We do that. So we go on 3 minutes, 5 minute break. 3 minutes. Don't extend it.